everyone here today to the launch of Keep London Working. I'm Catherine Stanyland, I'm the Director at New London Architecture, and I'm really pleased to welcome so many of you here today. Now today we're here to launch SEGRO's report entitled Keep London Working, which explores the importance of industrial land in London and the vital role that it has to play in supporting the capital's growth. As we know, London's population is expanding, while the growth in e-commerce means that businesses need to get their goods and services to their customers even more quickly. And all of this is placing increasing demands on the availability and location of industrial land. Now, the timing of this report and this discussion could not be more important, as Sadiq Khan is currently carrying out his review of the London Plan. And we at the NLA have been very pleased to work with SEGRO over the last few months on our own report called Work London, which examines the full needs of workspace requirements in the city, of which industrial land and industrial space is one of those core elements that really needs to have our key attention. So I'm really looking forward to hearing all of the presentations and the discussions today. Now we've got two speakers that are going to kick things off for us. We've got Amy Gillam, who's Head of Logistics from Turley, and Andy Guildford, who's the Chief Operating Officer at SEGRO. They're going to be joined by an expert panel for discussion and debate and lots of questions, I'm sure, from you. And then we will finish up at 9:30. So to kick things off, can we first of all please welcome Amy Gillam to the stage.
Good morning, everyone. Brilliant to see such a fantastic turnout today, and we're really excited to support SEGRO in the launch of this report, which we've worked on with them for a number of months. As Catherine introduced, this looks specifically at London's industrial land and the important role it plays within the capital and to keep London working. Within this, we look at the supply of this land, but also those occupiers of industrial spaces and how those sectors are changing, with a particular focus on urban logistics, which is experiencing the particular growth and change. So, as Catherine's introduced, I'm Amy Gillam, Head of Logistics at Turley. I lead our economics work within London, and this report's been produced with our economics team and also our sustainability team. So my colleague Leslie's here today as well if anyone has any questions afterwards. Very quickly, the boring bit, the approach. We started off with looking at GLA's own documentation on industrial land supply, how much is there and what is being released each year. I'll come to that at the end of the presentation. We also looked at national data sets from the Office for National Statistics on logistics and on other sectors that occupy industrial land, and looked at how these are changing and also the economic contribution they make to the capital. There's a big data caveat in there, something which we alone can't get around, but it's to do with the way that the ONS captures data on different sectors. What we can do is have a very clearly defined logistics sector when we're looking at urban logistics, so covering couriers, warehouse, road transport. What we can't do is understand the element of other sectors, such as retail, which are increasingly operating their own section of logistics as well, so operating their own delivery fleets. So that's just a caveat when we come onto the data, that those numbers are actually potentially the minimum figures that we should be talking about. And finally, to make sure that we have a bit of real life introduced, we have 7 case studies. These are all industrial land occupiers, some of which may be obvious as occupiers of that type of land and others may be less so. First of all, on the right-hand side of your screen at the top here, we have DHL and DB Schenker, part of DB Group. So both of these operate courier and freight operations. Top left, 2 retailers you all know about, Ocado and John Lewis. John Lewis, the largest omni-channel retailer in the UK, with around 280,000 products online and 1.5 billion in online sales last year. And their deliveries actually covered, half of their deliveries were to fulfil those online sales. We also have maybe a more traditional industrial land occupier in Brompton Bikes, and 2 companies that you might not expect to see on industrial land, MX1 and Farley Group, but they're not alone in the fact that they are 2 of many media and TV and film related companies that actually occupy industrial land. So I'll use those to illustrate various points as we go throughout the presentation. So first of all, why logistics? Why are we so concerned with logistics? Why not everything else that covers industrial land? And while we do touch on other types of industrial uses, we've seen such unprecedented growth in logistics across the capital that this is driving change for the need for continued supply of industrial land and in potentially different locations than we already have it supplied in. So the sector, and as I mentioned, these numbers are potentially minimum figures. We don't know the full extent of the range of logistics jobs and businesses because of the way the data is captured, but at a minimum, around 6,000 businesses and 76,000 employees. And that employee growth has been growing around 10% in the last 5 years, around 2,200 additional employees each year. So a real change, and particularly driven by growth in courier activities. Average salaries might surprise people. They're actually above the national average salary, so around 40% higher than the national average salary, and full-time working is actually above average as well. So there's a lot of potentially misconceptions around the quality of employment in these areas. And part of that above average salary is to do with increasing technical requirements, technical occupations, to do with the change towards digital media and the use of different picking, packing, GPS systems and so on. And also due to more and more customer service requirements. So drivers are essentially becoming the customer-facing parts of the business. So there's a need for them to have more skills and therefore command a higher salary. Also, quite an important factor, particularly for any local authorities in the audience today, around business rates. There's been a 40% increase in the business rate, in the rateable value of warehouse space in London over recent years, which means that if you were to build a 4,500 square metre warehouse over a 5-year period, that would actually generate just shy of £1 million in business rates. And from 2020, local authorities can keep uplift in business rates, so not a number to be afraid of. So we've talked about change, and I'll go through some of this change now. So there's been a real need for the sector to innovate and to respond to quite a considerable amount of growth that has been happening. And first of all, as Catherine alluded to earlier, a large amount of that growth is due to population change. So from 2011 to 2031, it's projected by the GLA that there'll be an additional 1.9 million people living within London. And that's equivalent to the residents of Birmingham and Coventry moving to London over that time frame. So all of those people are going to want to go to restaurants, go to Costa, buy different food items, buy clothes items, order furniture, and will just generally generate demand as you and I do already. Secondly, there's a considerable growth in e-commerce. The UK is Europe's largest e-commerce market, equivalent to around £60 billion last year, and rising at about 15% each year. And as we become more digitally enabled and as companies explore more and more innovative retail platforms, we're only going to see this growth continue. And what this also is meaning is that we as consumers are able to demand quicker and quicker delivery slots. So 1 hour delivery slots from the likes of Amazon, ASOS and Argos, all the A's for some reason, seem to be getting in on the act first, but others are likely to follow. So there's a real need for the sector to adapt and change and respond to this growth. And our case studies illustrated a number of different models that these companies are implementing. First of all, Ocado has a number of hub and spoke locations, so 3 hub locations across the country, one of which supplies into London. And that site at Hatfield supplies towards 7 different spoke locations, which then do the last mile deliveries. So the site at Origin, for example, in West London, is within accessible distance of Kensington and Chelsea, which is equivalent to 5% of Ocado's London market. So a really important need to be close to that market. In addition to this, we have a growth in click and collect. So John Lewis report around 20% additional spend when people actually go to pick up their item in store. So online retail actually then drives in-store retail as well. There's also reverse logistics. A whole new subsector is effectively emerging as a result of the 40% of items that we end up returning after we've ordered them online. So there's a whole new process that needs to go on behind the scenes of collecting those items, repackaging, steaming, making sure they're fit for sale again. And finally, consolidation centres, with a number of deliveries coming into London, and this might be for offices or it might be for shops. there's growing interest both from developers and from local authorities to look at consolidation centres, so how they can combine a number of deliveries so that they are consolidated within a fewer number of vans. So this clearly also has an impact on the locations that businesses want to be in or need to be in to fulfil that growing demand and the increasingly short timeframes that we're willing to wait around for our goods. So that time to market is one of 3 primary locational factors that are driving decisions around where businesses need to operate from. So Ocado, for example, are looking in increasingly central London locations. And DHL, one of our case studies, looked at and has recently got their Lewisham site because of the distance between the City of London to collect parcels to courier over to Heathrow for their international delivery service. So that location is really important to make sure that those flights can be met in the right time frame. Other case studies also indicated labour force as being particularly important. So Brompton, who train up their staff in very specialist skills, need to make sure that they can stay within proximity of those when they're searching for new sites. And all of our case studies, in fact, had either searched for new sites, potentially not being able to find the ones they wanted and having to go for something slightly different, or they were already at the end of what they thought was going to be a 5 or 10 year lifespan for a building, but they've already reached capacity within 2 years. So there's a real need for locations to be available for these businesses when they look for move-on space or indeed new sites to fulfil more growth. A fourth factor on location is more strategic, and one which is quite prominent at the moment within the media, within the news, and is also something that Sadiq Khan is taking very seriously as well. But this statistic might surprise you that in fact HGVs and light goods vehicles account for only 4% of London's total carbon emissions. It's actually a very small percentage. And when we look at NOx as well, that's also a similarly low percentage of around 10%. So in a different figure to the carbon emissions. So very, very minimal figures, and location means that if these activities were further away, there would be a greater impact on London's carbon and London's pollutants. The industry is also innovating, so there are a number of delivery fleet vehicle innovations as well as building innovations around environmental and energy efficiency, partly driven by the fact that being in London means that they are under the jurisdiction of the GLA that has tighter policy requirements for sustainability. So we've looked at the demands and locational requirements, but what about the supply? Where can these businesses actually locate? So at the moment, or at least 2 years ago, which was the latest available data, London has around 7,000 hectares of industrial land. Majority of this is already occupied. And it's predominantly focused towards the east and the west of London. So in over towards Heathrow, the UK's main cargo airport, and also towards the east with traditional manufacturing and access to the port. In 2011, the GLA identified that there could be a managed release of land because the land was potentially oversupplied compared to needs. And a target of 37 hectares for release each year was set. And over the course of the last 5 years, we've actually seen this target has been, in terms of loss, has been triple this amount, so 106 hectares a year as opposed to 37 target. So that's quite concerning, particularly when we look at the areas of London which have seen the greatest losses. So 12 London boroughs actually saw losses over 4 times greater than their own individual target, and 6 central London boroughs actually saw losses of over 8 times greater. And particularly for central London, this is an issue where we have 60% of London's employment and 40% of its population, so these are going to continue to be key markets for deliveries to reach. If we also look at transport routes, which are obviously imperative for logistics responses, and also other occupiers of industrial land who maybe don't immediately sound as though they are have logistics requirements, but Brompton, for example, will also have shipments it needs to get out. So being near arterial road network is very important. So a lot of those losses have been within that network. So looking forward, first of all, if we take a look at the targets for each borough, just very headline terms, don't worry about the details so much. If we look at what's been lost to date, the blue lines, we can see that quite a few local authorities have already reached their 2031 target, particularly in central London and in West London, so around Heathrow and Park Royal. If we then add on for the next 20 years the pipeline of anticipated losses, this is everything covering opportunity areas, housing zones, local plans. So it's not necessarily that these are all going to happen at once, but this is everything in the sort of the pipeline that we know about. Actually, that loss is going to be far greater. And this year, 2017, is quite an important year in this data, that if the losses have been continuing at the pace they had done to 2015, this is a tipping point year at which the 2031 target will actually already be reached. So what needs to happen? What is this all pointing towards? Well, clearly there needs to be a better understanding of what land is required and where, and understanding that the land that we do have available might not be the land in the best locations for industrial purposes. And ultimately we need to remember that these concerns and these requirements aren't going to go away. Population increase, so the estimated 1.9 additional residents to 2031, we estimate that they may have a retail spend of an additional £12 billion a year, some of which will be online retail, and if it's in store, those goods are still going to have to get in store. We also have the impact on the sector itself. So there's forecast growth of around 22,000 jobs within the logistics sector to 2031. If there are limitations to the land supply, then there's a danger that that growth will not be met. And further to that, it's the whole role of the sector as an enabling sector and being one which is essentially the supply chain for all other sectors. If the land isn't there, then these sectors also won't have their own business requirements met. And finally, just coming back to the environmental impacts, if we are looking at limited supply in London and there is a need to relocate facilities outside of London, then, for example, if we did a calculation, if DHL wasn't able to secure their Lewisham site but had to locate outside of the M25, there'd be around a 33% increase on their carbon emissions. So it has very, very immediate consequences of not having enough land. So the time is now. 2017 is the tipping point year. And Andy Gulliford will follow on from me in talking about some of those solutions, some of the ways that the industry is responding, and some of the next steps that could potentially be taken in policy terms and in industry terms. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. Andy Gulliford, Chief Operating Officer at SEGRO. Thanks first to Amy. Absolutely super report and super presentation. Delighted to work with you on it, and thanks for all your dedication and the team's dedication and professionalism. It's a really good piece of evidence-backed research that we can use, hopefully, to shape and frame things going forward. And thanks to Deloitte, who helped us a lot on the planning side as well, so really appreciated. But most of all, thanks to you all. I think the turnout says it all. This is obviously an issue that people are thinking about and are taking great interest in and are keen to work on. It's clearly a major challenge. Amy showed us that in her presentation. And this morning is about SEGRO's recommendations on how we might tackle that challenge. And on that, we're absolutely delighted to be backed by both the BPF and London First, who fully support our proposals and recommendations. Amy told us about population growth, urbanisation, and also the structural changes that are taking place with our living and working and our environment. That's particularly e-commerce. That comes up a lot, obviously, with the more recent growth. We're all, whether you like it or not, in a omni-channel world these days, and that needs a more sophisticated supply chain to cope. One thing we want to get very clear, there is a housing shortage. We understand that more homes need to be built, and we fully support that. The issue is that frequently those homes are being built on industrial land, and that's diminishing the supply in the way Amy described. There's basically competition for a finite resource. So our belief is that we need a balanced approach. We need to ensure that jobs are retained and even expanded, created, that the servicing infrastructure to keep London working is in place for those people living in the homes and working in those businesses throughout the capital. So our recommendations today are aimed at achieving balance, not a competition. And just to sort of break it up a little bit, I'll keep doing that, sorry. I thought we'd have a bit of fun. If you've got a box underneath your seat, could you pop your hand in the air? There's 1, 2, well, good. I'm not surprised so far. That's good. This is good. Maybe we could just go with the one down here first. Would you mind opening it up and just showing everybody what's going on?
We've got fruit and veg.
So there you go. Whether you are buying online or you have a local convenience store that you like to go to for your immediate fruit and veg needs, you're going to need some warehouses sitting behind that to supply those. Who's got the next one? Did I see one down here? Oh, Julia. Yeah, great. Oh, here we go. There we are. Internet retail, it's there. And that could be a return, I think, could it not? Yeah, it looks like a return coming on. But if you want these packages coming to your homes and businesses, these guys need some facilities to get them there. And last one, sorry, I lost the hand in it. Oh, great, thanks. That's what I think.
Bottle of beer.
Oh, bottle of beer.
Can I keep it?
Yeah, I think you've won. You've definitely won out, but maybe a little bit early. Maybe just, but I guess the point to make is it's not just about parcels, it's about the servicing of London. So production, manufacture, leisure, tourism, research and development, media and technology, all of these folks need the support infrastructure, the distribution and industrial infrastructure behind them to have places to work and places to be served from. So it's a broad church that needs these facilities. So that was a bit of silliness, and I apologise for that, rather cheesy, I know, but was trying to make a serious point, which is that on all of the previous slides I put up, those are our customers in our buildings getting those things to you for your everyday lives that allow you to live, work, move around. And the units in the middle of this graphic, if I can find the thing, if you can see the 3 red ones in the vertical, those are the units really that are sitting in and around the M25 in the Greater London area. That's the type of facility that we're talking about today that is desperately needed. And our customers are worried about their loss. Some of our customers, and thanks for coming along, are with us today, some of those case studies that Amy talked about. And you heard from her earlier that they're already at capacity quite frequently. They can't find the facilities they need. So we're going to miss out on jobs, we're going to miss out on that infrastructure, and so we're not even going to handle the population we've got, let alone a growing population. You could argue that we would actually be stopping London working, not keeping it working. So we need to find some solutions. And that's where we are this morning. We're putting forward 10 clear recommendations to keep London working. I'm not going to go through each of them. You can see the web link on the slide, and there's a little brief sort of handout with each listed for you to take away. Please do, though, go to the website and have a look and have a full read. It's really worth doing. I'm just going to pick 4 that really stand out for me. The first one, we need to understand what we actually have. So we need to undertake a strategic industrial land review. So we need to know how much we've got, where it is, whether it's in the right location, can it actually meet modern requirements, is it being protected, preferably expanded, but let's know what we've got. The second one, a comprehensive demand assessment. So what do we need? And not just in numbers terms, but the features of that land. is it suitable for the use that it'll be needed for? So plot density, circulation, power capacity. Amy was talking about more electric vehicles. They need to be charged. So we need to work out exactly what we need. And both of those, the supply and the demand side, should be undertaken on a London-wide perspective as well as borough by borough. Thirdly, we'd like to recommend that an industry voice is created, so a sounding board for policymakers made up of experts in this area, including some of our customers, so there's knowledge and knowledgeable input to policy making to get the right things for the future. And my fourth one was innovation and flexibility. Let's get that into our planning policy going forward. So let's talk about intensification of land use, multi-level, mixed use, consolidation facilities. That way, maybe we can use the land better, more intensively, and get homes and jobs. That's basically our proposals. As I say, there's the full document for you to go through at your leisure. I do hope you'll take the opportunity to do that. We're obviously going to have a debate on those recommendations now. But can I just thank you all for joining us this morning? And you can tell, I hope, there's a passion coming out of SEGRO in this arena. We're really keen to take this forward. We see the opportunity, but we also recognise the threat. So collectively, hopefully, we can all keep London working. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much to both Amy and to Andrew. We're now going to have a panel discussion and some questions from you. So if I can invite Amy back to the stage. And joining her will be Alan Holland, who's the Business Unit Director for Greater London at SEGRO, Colin Wilson, who's the Strategic Planning Manager at the Greater London Authority, and Ian Fletcher, who's the Director of Policy for the British Property Federation. So we've heard some pretty convincing arguments there. But Ian, to start with you, why should this audience care about what this report shows?
Good morning, and may I start by commending Tilly and SEGRO on their work. And actually, this forms part of an excellent triple box set in terms of research we've done at a national level on industrial, and also a report by Tilly on I think called the Land That Time Forgot. So I'd highly recommend those to you. I think, why is this sector important? Firstly, I'm actually the son of a shed renter. My dad rented various industrial units in Reading and Winnish Triangle, and for him, the importance of the sector was adaptability, flexibility, but he was a Scotsman, and affordability. And I think every mayor comes in and talks about wanting to create affordable workspace, and I suppose I'd urge that there's a lot of affordable workspace in this sector, and therefore protecting it is meeting that important objective for you. I think the second reason for supporting the sector is just the interdependency that the London business community is a network. If you start killing off that food chain, then eventually you starve the whale, as it were. And the case studies really draw that out in the report. I must admit, I read, I think the full report's about 112 pages. I read it from cover to cover, and it's a really good read in terms of not only talking about the industrial sector, but really shedding a light on the new economy.
Right. And Colin, how important is this issue to the Mayor, and how are you seeing it making its way through the next London plan?
Well, if you've read City for All Londoners, I'm sure you all have, then you'll know the Mayor's committed is very much committed to that, and very specifically references the importance of jobs, including industrial jobs in London, and the need to grow that sector as well as protecting it. He also references the need to protect open space and green belts, the need to produce housing, the need to make most out of major investments in transport, and the need to have a zero carbon economy. So that's quite an easy ask then. Many of you in the room will know that a lot of those things happen in the same place at the same time. So to make all those things happen in the same place at the same time, you need a very cunning plan. I think the plan has to be more cunning than we've done in the past, because touched on were things like industrial land release benchmarks. Probably the language is not great, because it implies, it doesn't imply, it states release, and so it's a kind of a bit of a downward trend. I think we've got to get the language right, and I think the slide where you had 33 boroughs release, that's not really a plan, that's just a record. So I think we need to articulate what the plan is in terms of how industrial, housing, transport investment kind of work together. And I think that was a really good point that Andy made, so that people can understand and kind of get that picture and how London's going to work in the longer term. Just one observation from me, about in 2010, we were doing a consultation on the Park Royal Opportunity Area Planning Framework, which is very much about protecting that kind of giant sort of 700 hectares of industrial land, which was supported by SEGRO. And we had a 2-day public consultation event, and 13 people turned up. So it's nice to see standing room only, kind of at the back here. As a venue, probably just off Tottenham Court Road is possibly a bit more attractive than Northampton. I don't know, but Northampton's changed. Northampton has changed a lot in the last 5 years.
And Alan, Andy talked about carrying out a sort of demand analysis of industrial users. How much interest and demand are you seeing from industrial users for space?
Well, good morning everyone, and thanks once again for coming. I think the standing room only is impressive, particularly this time in the morning. Great that there's so much interest. I think in terms of demand, we're seeing a very robust take-up across most markets in Greater London. We've heard the research really pinpointed the drivers of those demand, be it population growth or the advent of e-commerce. And our customers are very, very engaged in finding ways for their businesses to grow. And then when they look at their network plan around London and the main markets, it's increasingly hard to find the areas to grow and get the right type of accommodation that's close to where we want to be, where we live and where we work. So that demand side, as London, what is it now, Europe's largest, most populated city, going to grow to 10 million people in the next 15 years. Our customers are keen that they kind of leverage that growth to give London the benefits and advantages it needs.
And as Colin just referenced earlier in his comments before, the big challenge really seems to be accommodating industrial uses alongside perhaps this increasing need for residential as well. Are there ways in which that can be done in a more clever, intensive way?
I think in short, we think so. Andy made the point, this is about balance. It's about trying to work out how jobs and homes can be delivered in the same marketplace, sometimes side by side on the same site. We're working with the GLA and Colin's team over in Hayes, a former coffee factory, where we think that's more than possible. And that's probably just the start of creating genuinely sustainable places for people to live and work. And there's no technical reason or necessarily a policy reason why those two uses cannot sit side by side.
Yeah, and the Hayes example we think is exemplary, really, for a number of reasons. It's just outside of Crossrail 1 station, so massive investment in Crossrail 1. That'll be opening in 2 years' time. The site was designated until about 3 years ago strategic industrial land. So in the sort of statistical world, it's a loss of industrial. But what Barratt's and SEGRO are doing is putting industrial back onto that site. There's fairly dense housing next to the industrial, It's suburban intensification, which is something else the mayor's picked up on. So, Hayes, next door to this factory are bungalows. So it's making the most of a massive investment in public transport, delivering housing, but also delivering jobs. Something I thought I'd never see, which is SEGRO delivering brand new industrial behind the facade of a locally listed Art Deco factory. And it looks rather fantastic, actually. It's next to a canal. It shows that water doesn't necessarily equal residential developments. And I think there are a lot of lessons in it for Crossrail too. Why not take that as an example or exemplar and apply that to Crossrail too as part of that business case of where you can, to quote my ex-employer, you can have your cake and eat it.
I attended an excellent event by NLA a few nights ago on the London plan, and it was clear that GLA was sympathetic to not losing any more industrial land. It was clear that the industry was sympathetic to the need to intensify use on that land. The one sort of, I suppose, nagging down to her, it was a lousy night in terms of South West trains. Led me to spend half an hour at Waterloo, and the one nagging down to her was just that issue of affordability and what is going to work in terms of intensification and what's not going to work. The thing I'd hate to happen is for future mayors to come back and say, we've got industrial provision, but it's expensive. And so I think if there's a fourth piece of work in the offing, it is to illustrate what intensification means and how it works, and really provide that evidence base for the London plan.
Great. Now, do we have any questions from the floor? Yes, we have a question here. If you can say your name and where you're from before you speak.
Sure. Thank you. Rory Brooke from Savills. Thank you very much for the comments this morning. It's really directed mostly at Alan and others as well. So building on the work that you presented this morning, I'd be interested to know what SEGRO is doing more on thinking through intensification of industrial land, particularly multi-storey industrial buildings, and when we might see some of your thinking on that. And also another sort of linked piece is what your thinking is on improving the environment of industrial areas so that they become more attractive places for people to work, and think to the mixed-use theme of having facilities that are appealing and attractive to people, so that it appeals to a wider workforce and makes it more likely in these areas.
Sure. Thank you.
Did everyone hear the question, by the way? So the question is looking at the intensification of land and what's been happening to actually deliver multi-storey factories, and also what you're doing to improve the environment around those areas.
Thank you. Taking the first bit first. Intensification is clearly a kind of big topic, means different things to different people. I think our first challenge, and it's a collective one, is that the industry, occupiers, stakeholders, we need to look at this opportunity differently. We're at a point in time where we think London is well placed to grow going forward, but we can't do what we've always done in terms of scarce land supply and the competition in terms of competing use classes. So we need to break our mindset and thinking to deliver sustainable intensification. Turning to the specific on multi-level, we've been fairly fortunate, stroke unfortunate, to be the proud owners of the only two-storey multi-level building in the UK, which I have to say is now fully let for those that are interested. And we have been looking hard at the opportunities of intensifying by stacking various uses. And that's not just keeping it in the industrial sphere, looking at can we actually mix up homes and jobs, not just side by side as per Hayes, but actually blending them such they sit literally on top of each other. We're not ready to press the button tomorrow in terms of committing new capital to a scheme, but we can say that the appetite from our customers now is far different to previous cycles, and before too long, we are confident of delivering London's first multi-level building, but a bit more to do. A bit more work in terms of the design, in terms of planning policy. I mean, currently at the moment, if you look at B1C, B2 and B8, and you look to mix up uses, it doesn't quite work. One of the recommendations in our takeaway, please do take it away today, is to look at planning policy, such that this groundbreaking combination can work. On the second point, the environment, I think that means a couple of things. In terms of the actual product and the buildings, I think we've really moved the game on. So up in Enfield in North London, last year we finished the first carbon neutral shed, now let to a brewery, which we love. So that actually puts back more carbon than actually consumed in the construction of that building. So that's a first, as well as all the BREEAM certification, all that kind of stuff. So I think the product and the building has moved a long way. Turning to the environment, I think we need to create very coherent places. So Colin mentioned our approach at Hayes, which is looking beyond just the four walls and the roof and the kind of access to the site. It's creating somewhere which is connected to the train station, connected to the residential next door. And as you can see from some of the images, the actual built space is outstanding. So these are not noisy, kind of crusty sheds. They really are best in class example of people are happy and proud to work. So it's about getting the amenities provided by the wider development into our schemes.
If I can just add to that as well, there's also examples from Europe. So in Basel, where there's an existing industrial site, but where there's a new residential tower being built, and there's obviously been a lot of landscaping work going on, and it's not to make it look purely residential in terms of landscape, it's actually to give it an industrial feel to the pavements, and they've got old railway tracks running along that have been made, that they're not used anymore, but made to look nicer, and to actually give it quite a nice new character that actually meshes that industrial and residential to create a whole new type of place.
There are probably some easy wins, and we have a member that is one of the largest providers of self-storage in London, and they have plans to eventually turn all their self-storage warehouses into the self-storage will go underground, and they will build residential on top, and so there's easy wins there, but yeah, you've got to, I suppose, look at the different uses and how easily they lend themselves to that sort of provision.
Great. We have another question over here.
Hello, I'm Lorraine Collins from Uxbridge College, and I have to say that SEGRO are one of the best employer partners that we work with, and we're actually working with them on the Hayes site that's been referred to. But one of the things I wanted to ask is, I'm sure people know that the London Mayor has a target of 250,000 apprenticeships by 2020 in the London region, and obviously with homes and with jobs go skills, and it was really interesting to see about that 38,000 I think average salary in the logistics sector, because actually they are much higher level skills often than people think about. So I was wondering if SEGRO was hoping to influence the education strategy of the London Mayor, because they will be in charge of the skills budget they hope to be fairly soon. So there's a great synergy between what you're trying to do with the logistics in place, and also what the Mayor is trying to do to actually hit that target of 250,000 apprenticeships.
Alan, I think that's another one for you.
Thanks, Lorraine. Yeah, I think on the first point in terms of skills and training, that's an essential part of the mix. And we've been working hard with the colleges and various partners throughout London. It came out in the Turley's presentation. Quite often, when businesses find the accommodation, an equal concern is having the people, the workforce, to actually operate and run those facilities. And the thing about industrial in our sector is it's that range of jobs, whether they're in the office element, whether they're on the sort of production floor. There's a whole suite and range of jobs. And we've been working hard, and I think it's part of the Mayor's plans to really push apprentices and skills and training. Indeed, as part of our East Plus development partnership in East London, we've got a £300,000 investment to bring forward those skills and opportunities. And it's not just around the end business. There's a whole supply chain that functions and services the buildings that then in turn come out to the marketplace. So we need to look beyond just the actual building and try and harness the full opportunities of the supply chain.
Yeah, and the Jules Pipe is Deputy Mayor for Planning and for Skills. So his portfolio includes both things. So part of discussions with SEGRO, part of discussions with Hayes. Jules is kind of intimately involved in those discussions and in kind of developing the Mayor's delivery of that skills, education, apprenticeship agenda. So the way the Mayor's office is set up, I think is really useful for making all those things work together.
Great. We have a question here.
Yes, Ian MacDonald, Strategic Planning Advice Limited. I'd like to touch on the very dry question of supply and demand and the plea by SEGRO for a London-wide assessment of the availability, etc., in this very particular sector. I've recently done some research on the employment land policy of one of the boroughs that is 4 times over the rate of land loss that you've described, or that is meant to be happening in London. And the policy in terms of the evidence, in terms of its following the guidance from central government, NPPF, NPPG, in terms of the research that's done, in terms of the coarse grain of the outcome figure, is awful. It's just really, really flawed as a methodology. And my question is, I don't think local authorities at the local planning level are going to be able to deliver what SEGRO are looking for. Is it going to be the GLA that can do it, sector by sector, district by district? Or is it going to be SEGRO and their industrial colleagues who will have to take that on and deliver it to the planning authorities?
Could I pick that one up to start with? So as part of our research, we also looked at 8 different London boroughs. I won't name them now, but we obviously take a look at the report if you'd like to know more. And we looked at what their policy stance was with regards to logistics, so it included some of those 8 were very pro-logistics, and so it is a core part of their operations. Others, such as more central London boroughs, it was maybe less important, maybe more office-focused or residential-focused. And what we saw was that regardless of that policy stance, there was not necessarily the value placed on actually monitoring that release of land. So the policy didn't necessarily, not in all cases, but didn't necessarily translate into action. So I think that's a really key thing. I think it's about educating. We, as Turley, are also releasing a follow-up piece to the Land That Time Forgot, which is looking, it's more national, but it's looking at actually how local authorities are applying NPPF and PPG. So again, the very actionable response to how the government is assuming or expecting local authorities to approach land supply for commercial and industrial uses. But I think ultimately, in terms of the question of who should lead that, actually I think, I'm sure Colin will be able to add to this, but my feeling is it needs to be both sides of the story. So the way that employment land reviews are undertaken to look at the supply and demand, the starting point is forecasts, and it's very numbers driven, but then you are meant to add on that layer of reality, and it's that layer of reality that's potentially missing. We've seen such a pace of change in recent years that the data can't possibly keep up with that. We need that real life interpretation and understanding of how things are potentially going to change.
Colin, do you want to respond?
We are doing a demand and supply study at the moment, and we've got the kind of initial drafts of that, which the London Plan team are having a look at the moment. I think it was one of Andy's asks in his 4 points. But to Amy's point, I think it does need a kind of, and your point as well, a kind of finer degree of understanding. And one of the things we have been doing over the last couple of years is a kind of literally door-knocking exercise of going around these industrial estates and finding out what's happening on them. Who's in there? What do they do? How many people do they employ? Some sense of capital investments, because conversations I've had with Alan and Neil at Segro are, sometimes as planners or architects, you just see a big shed. But maybe there are many millions of pounds of capital investment locked up inside of that over a long period of time. And I think that understanding really hasn't kind of been in the planning system historically, but I think it's now picking that up to a much more sophisticated level than it had previously. And to the point about who's leading it, I think it absolutely, at the governance of London, it's a bit of both. It's not a kind of absolutely all-powerful mayor or boroughs who can just do their own thing. It's always a bit of both. But it is understanding it in a strategic way and planning as a city. So it's getting away really from the map of London with the 33 boroughs and individual benchmark releases. And I'm kind of looking at the back wall of this room where it's got Barnet, Enfield and Haringey plans, bump, bump, bump. They actually all sit together, and the industrial in Enfield is next to the industrial in Waltham Forest. And it's really about understanding the function of London as a city and a city within a bigger region, rather than trying to plan on the basis of benchmarks within 33 individual boroughs. And I think that would give you that would give you a more intelligent way of planning and leading as public authorities, both local and regional. And I think to lead something, you have to articulate it clearly so people can understand what it is that you're planning for, if you're an investor. Actually, on the brewery point, just rather randomly, sometimes I get very random phone calls at City Hall, and about midway through last year, Camden Hells Brew phoned me up and said, "Hello, you're the GLA. Have you got any factories I could have to expand my brewery into?" And I said, "Well, no, but I knew somebody who might do," so I gave them Neil's contact, and it all seemed to have ended quite happily, really. Not that the GLA have any preferential arrangements with Segro, but it kind of illustrates in a way that kind of, if you are a business, how do you understand where these things are and what's happening? And often plan policy is quite opaque, and it doesn't need to be. It can be a lot more straightforward, and it could be a lot more joined up, a lot more of a plan rather than just a sort of statistical benchmark release allocated to individual boroughs.
Yeah.
As the British Property Federation, we get the same calls, and we send them to the GLA. No, we don't. The question is really important, in that it's not just protecting the quantum of industrial land. There is an important spatial element to this, and if ever there is a use in the property sector that is location driven, then it is this logistics and industrial sector. So the first recommendation of the report is an absolutely critical one in terms of having that strategic review of industrial land in London.
And just one more point, one of the things we started doing in Newham was there's a really good guy in Newham who ran their GIS team. And he sort of came up with this great way of recording industrial land use for their industrial land review on their GIS database, which we put onto ours. So one of the things we were quite keen to do was to run that out for a London-wide purpose, so you could have this kind of live data coming in about, because at the moment, if you don't do that, when you do surveys of things, they're very current in when they're produced. Then they go on a shelf. Then somebody gets a job somewhere else, and then somebody can't remember where that study went, and then somebody's lost it. So I think it's really, we have a great opportunity to be much more organised and intelligent about the way we record those things and how that informs the decisions we make.
Great. We've got quite a few more questions, so we've got one just over here.
Nigel Cram from Hillingdon Council, which includes Hayes, which we've heard so much about this morning. Whilst welcoming the jobs that the Nestle's development will create, had some concerns about the continued automation, particularly in the logistics sector, and about the impact that's going to have on the long-term volume employment. So could I have some thoughts from the panel in terms of the impact that this is going to have on places like Hayes in the future?
Amy, yeah, I'll take that one. So we've seen from a number of our case studies and also from the work that we did for BPF delivering the goods that we launched around a year ago, that actually automation obviously is taking place and it's needed in terms of responding to the large levels of growth. There's a lot more throughput that needs to be processed. In our previous BPF work, we included DPD Group, it was one of our case studies, and this was a location outside of London, but in a new facility that they created, they'd invested very heavily, about 50 million, in a new parcel sortation system so that they could process around 6 times the volume that they would process in a normal facility. So this obviously means that there's greater throughput. So because of that, they actually need more staff and more drivers to then deliver those goods. So there's actually, automation doesn't necessarily replace the staff, it creates new types of jobs required, particularly more technical staff or more driver staff. So that also then relates back to what sort of skills are needed. And going back to the question around apprenticeships, actually more technical, more electrical and technical engineering, more IT skills. We're also seeing more office-based components dealing with sales and processing of orders as well. So actually it's almost expanding what the possibilities are. So very much a different side to that story we were seeing in our case studies.
I think just to add to that, if I may, I think it's part of the intensification argument. So to give you an example, at one of our schemes in West London at Park Royal, the Origin scheme, where we've got John Lewis and Ocado amongst others as customers, the job creation numbers there are twice than what we expected, largely a result of 24/7 operations, high intensity use of the buildings. You know, these are not inert, empty sort of warehouses as such. The technology advances and the automation actually tends to drive and increase productivity, resulting in more jobs, not less. So just taking that as an example, we see as much opportunity from robotics and automation as we do a kind of a threat or a risk.
And that leads me on to looking at the future of the industry and thinking about the future of smart technologies, driverless vehicles, drone deliveries. What sort of impact do you think that could have on the long term of the industry?
Well, I think there's clearly been, technology has disrupted some industries. If you look at the essential drivers of the world in which we operate and our customers operate, it's probably going to be a good thing overall on a net basis. Depending the advance of various technologies, lorries that can drive themselves, cars that can drive themselves, parcels that can fly around London, maybe, who knows. Taken together, what our customers are telling us is typically you need somewhere for all that stuff either to be sorted, to be arranged, and ultimately then moved out to customers or end user. So we're kind of we're positive about those advances. We know we can hold back technology, and I think some of the clever ideas coming out now ought to be embraced. There's a lot of solutions to the problem around sort of the carbon issue in London and the sort of the news from the mayor last week around pollution levels. Well, actually, the advance of electric vehicles and the whole technologies around batteries could actually be a big solution to that problem. So I think it'd be good for the industry, actually.
It surprised me at your event on Monday how much discussion there was about air quality in London, and clearly the mayor has made that one of his significant sort of priorities of toting policy, and it was good to see in the report there was, I think, a whole chapter 4 that was devoted to how those new technologies, how the sector is seeking to minimise its carbon output and meet its objectives. So I think that's all to the good.
Great. Well, we've just come up to time. It's been an absolutely fascinating discussion and great input from you as well. So all that's left for me really is just to please thank all of our speakers in the usual way, and thank all of you as well for coming.